Dr. Sarah Chin stood frozen at the observation deck of the International Space Station, her coffee floating forgotten beside her trembling hand. Through the reinforced glass, she watched something that defied every law of physics she had spent 20 years studying. The moon, Earth's constant companion for 4 billion years, had a crack running across its face. It started as a hairline fracture, barely visible even to the station's most powerful telescopes. Within hours, it had grown into a chasm that stretched from pole to pole, a dark scar splitting the lunar surface into 2 distinct hemispheres. Sarah's mind raced through impossible calculations, searching for any explanation that made sense. Meteor impact? No, nothing large enough had been detected. Tectonic activity? The moon was geologically dead. Internal pressure? Impossible. But there it was, undeniable and terrifying. Back on Earth, the first person to notice was Marcus Webb, a night shift security guard at a chemical plant in Nebraska. He had been making his rounds when something felt wrong. The shadows weren't falling the way they should. He looked up and dropped his flashlight. The full moon, which should have been a perfect circle, looked strange, distorted, like someone had drawn a line through it with a giant pencil. Within minutes, social media exploded. People from Tokyo to London, from Sydney to Sao Paulo, were posting pictures and videos. The moon was breaking apart. Astronomers scrambled to their observatories. News anchors interrupted regular programming. Scientists were pulled from their beds and rushed to their labs. The world held its breath. Dr. Chin contacted Mission Control immediately. Her voice was steady, professional, hiding the terror crawling up her spine. Houston, we have visual confirmation. The lunar surface shows a fracture approximately 40 kilometers wide at its widest point. It's still expanding. The response came after a crackling pause. Copy that. ISS. We're seeing the same thing. NASA headquarters is convening an emergency meeting with international space agencies. Stand by for further instructions. Stand by. As if there was anything else they could do, suspended 400 kilometers above a planet that was about to face its worst nightmare. On Earth, governments went into crisis mode. The President of the United States was rushed to an underground bunker. The United Nations called an emergency session. Military forces across the globe went on high alert, not because they could fight the moon, but because they knew what came next. Panic, chaos, the collapse of social order. Dr. Raymond Foster, NASA's chief astrophysicist, stood before a room full of world leaders via video conference. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing is unprecedented. The moon appears to be fracturing along its equatorial plane. If this continues, we're looking at a complete separation of the lunar body into 2 distinct masses. What caused this? Demanded the Chinese premier. We don't know. There's no evidence of external impact. No seismic activity was detected prior to the fracture. It's as if the moon simply decided to break apart. What are the consequences? Asked the German chancellor, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Foster pulled up a simulation on the screen. If the moon splits completely, the gravitational effects on Earth will be catastrophic. Tides will become unpredictable and extreme. Coastal cities will be inundated. The change in gravitational pull could affect Earth's rotation and axial tilt. Weather patterns will become erratic. Earthquakes and volcanic activity will increase dramatically. How long do we have? The British Prime Minister asked. Based on the current rate of expansion, the fracture will be complete in approximately 72 hours. 3 days. Humanity had 3 days before everything changed forever. The news hit the public like a tsunami. Stock markets crashed within hours. People flooded grocery stores, fighting over supplies. Gas stations ran dry as millions tried to flee coastal areas. Churches, mosques, and temples overflowed with people seeking comfort in prayer. Some saw it as divine judgment. Others called it the end of the world. But amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. People started helping each other. In Miami, where the ocean was already showing signs of tidal disruption, neighbors who had never spoken before worked together to evacuate elderly residents. In Mumbai, volunteers formed human chains to guide people to higher ground. In Tokyo, Strangers shared food and shelter with those who had nowhere to go. The approaching catastrophe stripped away the petty differences that usually divided people. Suddenly, everyone was simply human, facing an incomprehensible threat together. Sarah Chun watched it all unfold from the ISS. The station's orbit gave her a unique perspective. She could see both Earth and the Moon, the planet of the living and its dying satellite. The crack continued to widen, now visible to the naked eye. Chunks of lunar material were beginning to drift away from the main masses. The Moon was dying, and soon it would take Earth civilization with it. Her crewmate, Russian cosmonaut Dmitry Volkov, floated beside her. "My daughter is in St. Petersburg," he said quietly. "She's 7 years old. She's afraid of the dark. I wonder if she's looking at the Moon right now, wondering why it's breaking." Sarah reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "Kids are resilient. She'll be okay." "Will she?" Dimitri's eyes met hers. "Will any of them?" Sarah had no answer. On Earth, scientists worked frantically. Dr. Foster assembled a team of the world's brightest minds. Physicists, geologists, astronomers, engineers. They analyzed data, ran simulations, searched desperately for a solution that didn't exist. You couldn't fix the Moon with duct tape and hope. You couldn't glue it back together. All they could do was watch and calculate the damage it would cause. But one scientist refused to give up. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese quantum physicist, had a theory so wild that his colleagues initially dismissed it. "What if," he proposed during a video conference with the international team, "the Moon isn't breaking apart from physical forces? What if it's a quantum event?" "Explain," Dr. Foster said, leaning forward. 4 months ago, the Chinese space program detonated a small nuclear device on the far side of the Moon. They claimed it was for mining research, to study the composition of lunar regolith. What if that explosion triggered something at the quantum level? What if it disrupted the fundamental forces holding the Moon's structure together? The room fell silent. Then someone laughed. "That's impossible. One small explosion couldn't do that." "Normally, yes, but the Moon's core has been cooling for billions of years. Its internal structure is in a delicate balance. Introduce the right kind of disruption at the right location." Kenji pulled up his calculations. The quantum destabilization would cascade through the entire structure, like dropping a stone into perfectly still water. "Even if you're right," said a French physicist, "what can we do about it?" "We reverse it. We create a counterpulse, a quantum stabilization field that forces the molecular bonds to reconstitute." "With what?" "We don't have technology that can generate that kind of field." Kenji smiled grimly. "Actually, we do. The Large Hadron Collider. If we modify it, increase its output by a factor of 10,000, and beam the resulting quantum field at the Moon." "That's insane," someone protested. "You're talking about turning the world's most powerful particle accelerator into a weapon we don't understand, aimed at a celestial body that's already falling apart. What if you make it worse?" "What if I don't try?" Kenji shot back. "In 60 hours, the Moon completes its separation. The gravitational shock will trigger tsunamis that will drown coastal cities. The tidal disruption will cause earthquakes on every continent. Millions will die in the first week. Billions will die in the month that follow as agriculture collapses and infrastructure fails. What exactly do we have to lose?" Dr. Foster looked around the virtual room at the faces of his colleagues. Fear, doubt, but also a flicker of hope. How long would it take to modify the LHC? 48 hours. Maybe less if we skip safety protocols. "Do it." The order went out immediately. Engineers descended on CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, in Switzerland. They worked in shifts around the clock, ripping out safety systems, redirecting power from entire regions of Europe to feed the accelerator's massive energy requirements. The world watched and waited, hope and despair balanced on a razor's edge. Above them, the Moon continued its slow death. The crack had widened to nearly 60 kilometers. The two halves were beginning to separate, held together only by their mutual gravity. Smaller chunks broke away, creating a ring of debris around the lunar remnants. It was beautiful and terrible, like watching a glacier calve into the sea. Sarah Chin couldn't sleep. She floated in the ISS's observation module, watching Earth below. From this height, it looked peaceful. The blue oceans, the white clouds, the brown and green continents. You couldn't see the panic in the streets, the crying children, the people saying goodbye to loved ones just in case. You couldn't see the brave engineers at CERN working to save them all. T-minus 12 hours to lunar separation, Mission Control announced. CERN reports they're on schedule for the attempt. The attempt. That's what they were calling it now. Not a solution, not a rescue. An attempt. With 6 hours remaining, CERN ran its final tests. The modified particle accelerator hummed with enough energy to power a small nation. The quantum field it would generate had never been tested, never even been created outside of theoretical models. They were about to fire at the moon and hope it worked. This is either the greatest achievement in human history, Dr. Tanaka said, standing in the control room, or the final mistake. Either way, Dr. Foster replied from NASA headquarters. It's something. Doing nothing was never an option. The world stopped, literally stopped. Factories shut down. Cars pulled over. People stepped out of their homes and looked up at the sky. In this moment, there were no nations, no religions, no divisions. There was only humanity, united in fear and hope, watching their moon die and praying for a miracle. Final checks complete, the lead engineer at CERN announced. Power at maximum. Quantum field generators stable. Targeting systems locked on lunar coordinates. All stations, this is CERN control. Commencing quantum pulse in T-minus 60 seconds. May whatever higher power exists have mercy on us all. Sarah counted down in her head. 60, 59, 58. She thought about her parents in California, her sister in New York, all the people she'd never said goodbye to. 45, 30, 15, 10, 9, 8. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Mark. The Large Hadron Collider unleashed its accumulated energy in a single focus beam. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, wasn't a laser or a missile. It was a wave of quantum probability, a field of fundamental forces sent screaming across the void at the speed of light. It would take 1.3 seconds to reach the moon. Those seconds felt like years. The quantum field hit the moon's fractured surface, and something impossible happened. The crack stopped expanding. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, slowly, impossibly, the crack began to close. We have movement, a technician shouted at CERN. The fracture is reversing. On the ISS, Sarah watched through the telescope as the two halves of the moon began to draw back together. The debris field started collapsing inward. The quantum bonds that had been shattered were reforming, pulling the lunar material back into coherence. It's working, Dmitri breathed beside her. My God, it's actually working. The world erupted in celebration. People poured into the streets, crying, laughing, embracing strangers. Church bells rang. Car horns blared. In every language, in every corner of the globe, humanity celebrated survival. But in the CERN control room, Dr. Tanaka wasn't celebrating. He was staring at his monitors, his face growing pale. The field strength is dropping faster than projected. We need to boost output. We're already at maximum, the engineer replied. If we push harder, we risk overloading the entire system. If we don't push harder, the quantum field will collapse before the moon fully reconstitutes. We'll be right back where we started. Dr. Foster's voice crackled over the speakers. Kenji, how long can you maintain current output? Maybe 20 minutes. The moon needs 40. Then we buy you 20 more minutes. Redirect all available power. Contact every power station in Europe. Tell them to divert everything to CERN. Everything. Across Europe, lights went out. Factories went dark. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Every available watt of electricity was funneled into the particle accelerator, feeding the quantum field that was slowly, painfully, knitting the moon back together. Sarah watched the lunar surface through the telescope. The crack was closing, but so slowly. Too slowly. Come on, she whispered. Just hold together. Please. 15 minutes. 20. 25. The systems at CERN were screaming. Warning lights flashed. Alarms blared. The accelerator was running beyond every safety limit, pushed to the absolute edge of catastrophic failure. Engineers stood by with fire extinguishers, ready for the inevitable meltdown. 30 minutes, someone called out. Field strength holding at 60%. It's not enough, Dr. Tanaka said. We need 70% to complete the reconstitution. We don't have 70%. Then find it. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Power stations in Asia began redirecting their output to CERN through a hastily assembled network of transmission lines. Then Africa. Then the Americas. One by one, nations that hours before had been preparing for war were now unified in a single purpose: save the moon. The quantum field strength climbed. 65%, 68, 70. Lunar fracture at 30% closure, Sarah reported from the ISS. 20%, 10%. At CERN, smoke was rising from the accelerator. Circuits were frying. The entire complex shook with the strain. Dr. Tanaka gripped his console, watching the numbers. They had one chance. If the field collapsed now, it would be too late to restart. 5%. Sarah's voice was shaking. 3%. 1%. The moon sealed. The crack disappeared. The debris field collapsed back into surface. Earth's ancient companion was whole again. At CERN, the particle accelerator finally gave up. It shut down in a cascade of sparks and smoke, having given everything it had. Engineers collapsed in exhaustion. Dr. Tanaka sat down heavily, his hands shaking. They had done it. Against every odd, against the laws of physics themselves. They had saved the moon. Dr. Foster's voice came over the speakers, thick with emotion. CERN, this is Houston. We confirm lunar reconstitution is complete. The moon is stable. You did it. You saved us all. The celebration that followed dwarfed the first. This wasn't relief. It was pure, unbridled joy. Humanity had stared into the abyss and refused to fall. They had faced the impossible and found a way through sheer determination and cooperation. On the ISS, Sarah and Dmitri floated together, watching the moon shine whole and beautiful against the stars. Do you think we learned anything from this? Dmitri asked. Sarah considered the question. Down below, she could see lights coming back on across Europe. In a few hours, life would return to normal. People would go back to their jobs, their routines, their old conflicts and divisions. But maybe, just maybe, they'd remember this moment. They'd remember what it felt like to be united, to work together, to save each other. I hope so, she said finally. I really hope so. 3 days later, Sarah returned to Earth. As her capsule descended through the atmosphere, she looked back one last time at the moon. It appeared unchanged, eternal, as if the crack had never existed. But she knew better. The world had changed. They had cracked the moon, and then they had fixed it. Together, that had to mean something. In Tokyo, Kenji Tanaka stood with his daughter, watching the full moon rise over the city. She pointed up at it. Daddy, they said the moon was broken, but it looks fine to me. He smiled and pulled her close. That's because people fixed it. When things break, we fix them. That's what we do. Can we fix anything? Kenji thought about the question, about everything they'd accomplished in those terrifying 72 hours, about how nations that could barely speak to each other had worked together seamlessly, about how strangers had become neighbors, and neighbors had become family. I don't know if we can fix anything, he said honestly, but I know we can try. And sometimes that's enough. The moon shone down on Earth, a silver reminder of humanity's greatest crisis and finest hour. The crack was gone, sealed by science and determination, but the memory remained, etched into the collective consciousness of every person who had lived through those 3 days. They had cracked the moon in half, and then they had made it whole again. If they could do that, what else might they accomplish if they worked together? The answer, Sarah Chun thought as she stepped onto solid ground for the first time in 6 months, was anything. Absolutely anything. The moon rose full and bright, silent witness to the resilience of the small blue world that circled below. For 3 weeks, Life slowly returned to normal. The stock market stabilized. People returned to their homes. Scientists published papers analyzing the quantum phenomenon. The world breathed easier. Then Sarah Chun noticed something wrong. She was back at NASA headquarters in Houston, analyzing post-crisis data, when she saw it. A tiny fluctuation in the moon's gravitational field. Barely detectable, but there. She ran the numbers again, certain she'd made a mistake. The numbers didn't lie. "Dr. Foster," she said, her voice tight, "we have a problem." Raymond Foster looked up from his desk, and the expression on Sarah's face made his blood run cold. "What kind of problem?" "The quantum field we use to seal the moon. It didn't just repair the fracture. It created a resonance pattern. The moon's internal structure is vibrating at a frequency that's increasing exponentially." "In English, Sarah." She pulled up a simulation on the screen. "The moon is a bomb, and it's about to go off." The room spun around Foster. They had saved the world, only to doom it 3 weeks later. "How long?" 36 hours. Maybe less. "What happens when it goes off?" Sarah's hands trembled as she manipulated the simulation. The moon exploded in a silent cascade of destruction. The moon will shatter into thousands of fragments. Some will be pulled into Earth's gravity well. We're looking at an extinction-level meteor shower. Nothing will survive. Not the cities, not the oceans, not us. Foster grabbed his phone. "We need Tanaka. Now." Within hours, the emergency team reassembled. But this time, there was no hope in their eyes. Only grim acceptance. "Can we reverse it?" Foster asked Kenji over the video call. The Japanese physicist looked like he hadn't slept in days. His calculations covered every surface of his lab. "No, the resonance is self-sustaining. It's feeding on the quantum field we created. Every second, it grows stronger. We can't stop it. There has to be something." "There is," Kenji interrupted. His voice was hollow. "We destroy the moon before it explodes. A controlled demolition instead of a catastrophic detonation. If we break into larger, predictable chunks, we can calculate their trajectories, maybe deflect the dangerous ones." "How do we destroy the moon in 36 hours?" demanded the Russian representative. Kenji pulled up schematics. "Every nuclear weapon on Earth. We launch them all simultaneously, detonate them in a synchronized pattern across the lunar surface. The combined force should fracture the moon into manageable pieces." The room erupted in chaos. Voices shouted over each other in a dozen languages. Destroy the moon? Use every nuclear weapon humanity possessed? It was madness. "Enough!" Foster's voice cut through the noise. "Does anyone have a better idea?" Silence. "Then we do what we have to do. Contact every nuclear power. We have 36 hours to save the world." Again. The next day was the most surreal in human history. Nuclear missiles, instruments of war and mutual destruction, were repurposed as tools of salvation. Russian ICBMs, American Minutemen, Chinese Dongphones, British Tridents, French M51s, Israeli Jerichos, Pakistani Goris, Indian Agnis. Every warhead humanity had ever built, all pointed at the same target. "This is insane," Dmitri said aboard the ISS, watching preparations through the telescope. "We're going to blow up the moon." "Better than letting it blow itself up," Sarah replied. But her voice shook. They were about to do something irreversible. The moon had orbited Earth for billions of years. In a few hours, it would exist only in memory. Down below, people gathered in streets and parks, eyes turned skyward. Some prayed, some cried, some simply stood in numb silence, watching the celestial companion that had illuminated countless nights, inspired endless songs and poems, guided sailors across oceans and lovers to each other. They were saying goodbye. In a bunker deep beneath NORAD, military commanders from every nuclear nation sat together at a single table. Old enemies, forced by circumstance to trust each other completely. One wrong move, one missile astray, and they'd rain nuclear fire on Earth instead of the moon. "All stations report ready," the American general announced. "Targeting solutions confirmed. Trajectories locked. Russian Federation confirms ready. China confirms ready." One by one, Every nation checked in. For the first time in history, humanity's weapons were truly united in a single purpose. Dr. Tanaka, Foster said over the comm system, "The floor is yours." In Tokyo, Kenji stood before a massive display showing the moon's position, the orbital paths of thousands of satellites, the trajectories of every missile. His daughter's drawing of the moon hung on the wall behind him, a crayon circle with a smiling face. He'd never take it down. "Launch sequence initiating in T-minus 10 minutes, he announced. All warheads are set for synchronized detonation. The explosion pattern will fracture the moon into approximately 40 major fragments. 17 will be captured by Earth's gravity. 11 will drift into deep space. 12 will enter unstable orbits requiring future deflection missions. And the 17 coming toward Earth, someone asked. 3 will burn up in the atmosphere. 7 will impact in oceans. The tsunamis will be devastating but survivable, for we'll hit uninhabited areas. 3, he paused. 3 we can't fully predict. They could land anywhere. So we're gambling. We've been gambling since the moment the moon cracked, Kenji replied. At least now we're playing with loaded dice. T-minus 5 minutes. Sarah watched from the ISS as the missiles launched. Hundreds of trails of fire rising from Earth like a metal flower blooming toward the moon. It was beautiful and horrible. Humanity's capacity for destruction transformed into an act of survival. For minutes, in Mumbai, a mother held her children close on their apartment balcony. In London, an old man sat in his garden, remembering when he'd watched the first moon landing as a boy. In Sao Paulo, a couple danced in the street to music playing from someone's radio, determined to spend what might be their last moments in joy rather than fear. 3 minutes. The missiles reached lunar orbit, positioning themselves across the moon's surface in a geometric pattern calculated to the millimeter. Each warhead was a trigger point, a controlled demolition charge on a cosmic scale. 2 minutes. Kenji's hands hovered over the detonation console. 1 button. That's all it would take. 1 button to end 4 billion years of history. He thought about his daughter's question. Can we fix anything? Maybe not. Maybe some things, once broken, stayed broken. Maybe this was one of those times. 1 minute. Dr. Tanaka, Foster said quietly, "Thank you for everything you've done. Whatever happens now, you gave us a chance." Kenji nodded, unable to speak. His finger moved the button. 30 seconds. Sarah gripped Dimitri's hand. Around the world, billions held their breath. 10, 9, 8. Kenji closed his eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered to the moon, to the universe, to every human who had ever looked up at that pale circle with wonder. 3, 2, 1. He pressed a button. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the moon lit up like a second sun. Every warhead detonated simultaneously, releasing the accumulated destructive power of decades of Cold War paranoia. The light was so bright that for a moment, night became day across half the Earth. The moon shattered, not into dust, but into massive fragments that tumbled away in slow motion, each piece of mountain range torn free from its ancient home. The destruction was catastrophic and strangely graceful, like watching ice break apart in spring thaw, magnified to impossible scale. Fragment tracking confirmed. A technician called out, "Trajectories nominal." The pattern held. Sarah watched through the telescope as the pieces drifted apart. Some spun away into darkness, never to return. Others began their long fall toward Earth, glowing as they entered the atmosphere. She could calculate their landing sites, estimate the damage. Millions would die from the impacts and tsunamis, but billions would survive. Brace for impact, Foster announced the world. T-minus 40 minutes to first fragment contact. The fragment that hit the Pacific Ocean was the size of Mount Everest. The tsunami it created was 300 meters tall, a wall of water that obliterated everything within 100 kilometers of the coastline. But the evacuation had worked. Most people had reached high ground. Most. The second fragment struck the Sahara Desert, vaporizing sand into glass and creating a crater visible from space. The shock wave circled the globe, shattering windows in distant cities, but causing no casualties. The third fragment broke apart in the atmosphere, raining smaller pieces across Siberia. Fires erupted in the taiga forest, but they would burn out. One by one, the fragments fell. Each impact was catastrophe. Each one was survivable, except for Fragment 17. "We have a problem," the tracking technician said, his voice rising. "Fragment 17's trajectory has shifted. It's going to hit a populated area." "Where?" Foster demanded. The technician's face went white. "Manhattan?" The word hit like a physical blow. 8 million people. The heart of New York City. There wasn't time to evacuate. Fragment 17 would strike in 12 minutes. Sarah felt the world drop away. Her sister lived in Manhattan. Her sister and her 2 nephews. "Is there anything we can do?" Foster asked, though his voice said he already knew the answer. "Nothing," the technician replied. "It's too large, moving too fast. Impact in 11 minutes. In New York, sirens wailed. People looked up at the sky, watching the fragment descend like a meteor of doom. Some ran, though there was nowhere to run to. Some prayed. Some called loved ones to say goodbye. Sarah's sister answered her phone on the first ring. "Sarah? Emily." Sarah's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Emily said, and incredibly, she sounded calm. "We're together. The boys and me. We're on the roof. We can see it coming. It's actually kind of beautiful." "I love you," Sarah whispered. "I love you too. Tell Mom and Dad." The line went dead. Fragment 17 struck Manhattan at 17,000 kilometers per hour. The impact vaporized the entire island instantly, unleashing the energy of 1,000 nuclear weapons. The shock wave leveled everything within 50 kilometers. The thermal pulse ignited fires that would burn for weeks. 8 million souls, gone in a fraction of a second. On the ISS, Sarah screamed, a sound of pure anguish that her crewmates would never forget. She had saved the world, and it had cost her everything that mattered. The world mourned. New York was gone. Sydney, hit by the tsunami, was gone. Coastal regions around the Pacific were devastated. The final death toll would take months to calculate, but estimates started at 30 million and climbed from there. But 7 billion people survived. 1 month later, Sarah stood at what had once been the edge of Manhattan. Now it was just a crater filled with seawater, a new bay in the coast where a city had thrived for centuries. She held a small box containing her sister's belongings, recovered from her apartment in California, a photo album, a necklace, tiny pieces of a life erased. Dr. Chun. She turned to find Kenji Tanaka standing behind her, looking as broken as she felt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm the one who designed the detonation pattern. Fragment 17 was my responsibility. Your sister, I killed her." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No, you saved my parents. You saved my friends. You saved humanity. Sometimes the math is cruel. Sometimes you can't save everyone. But you save who you can. Does that make it hurt less?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "But it makes it mean something." They stood together in silence. 2 people who had saved the world and lost pieces of their souls doing it. Around them, survivors were already rebuilding, planning new cities, adapting to a sky without a moon, learning to live with tides that were gentler now, seasons that were less stable, nights that were darker. Above them, where the moon had once hung, there was now a ring of debris, asteroid chunks and lunar fragments, caught in Earth's gravity, forming a new feature in the sky. It wasn't as bright as the moon had been, but it was beautiful in its own way, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been saved. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Kenji asked. Sarah thought about her sister, about the millions who had died, about the billions who lived. "I think we did the only thing, and we live with the consequences. That's all anyone can do." That night, Sarah stood outside and looked up at the ring of debris glittering in the starlight. Somewhere in that ring was a piece of moon that had watched over Earth for billions of years. Somewhere in that ring was a monument to human determination. to sacrifice, to the terrible choices that survival sometimes demanded. She thought about her sister's last words. It's actually kind of beautiful. Maybe that was a lesson. That even in catastrophe, even in loss, there was beauty. That humanity could shatter their moon and survive the consequences. That they could make impossible choices and live with the weight of them. The lunar ring shimmered overhead, and Sarah whispered a promise to everyone they'd lost. We'll remember. We'll honor you by living, by rebuilding, by being worthy of the sacrifice. The world had cracked the moon in half, destroyed it to save themselves, and lost millions in the process. But they had survived, scarred, changed, diminished, but alive. And in the end, that was a miracle. Not that they had saved everyone, but that they had tried. Not that they had avoided catastrophe, but that they had faced it with courage. The moon was gone, but humanity remained, looking up at the sky with the same wonder that had driven them to reach for the stars in the first place. That would have to be enough.